All right, everybody, welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're going to be talking about staying vigilant and active in the political process.
Yeah,
Because, we always say it's important to vote,
absolutely.
but I think a lot of us sometimes feel like, we vote,
Right.
and then what?
Yeah.
You know, what else is there to do?
Yeah.
So we're going to talk about that today. So we're drawing on a really fascinating discussion about the nuts and bolts of being an active citizen.
Yeah.
Um, and maybe kind of rethinking our role in the
Mm-hmm.
political process beyond just going to the ballot box.
For sure.
So we're going to talk about how you can do that today and hopefully provide you with some concrete strategies to move beyond just surface level engagement and really hold your elected officials accountable.
Yeah.
So first up, we always talk about elections are coming up or whatever, and
Yeah.
everybody's talking about the different parties and things like that.
Yeah.
But I think it's important to think about going beyond party loyalty and catchy slogans. And so, it's easy to vote along party lines.
Mm-hmm.
We all kind of do it, I think, sometimes.
Sure.
But what practical steps can we take before we even cast that ballot to
Yeah.
make sure that we're really making the best choice?
Right. So I think what's interesting in this source material that we looked at was the idea of political due diligence.
Right.
Right. So not just reading a campaign ad or listening to somebody's talking points or,
Right.
whatever,
Yeah.
those kinds of things.
Right.
But instead, doing your own research, right? Like
Yeah.
digging into their actual policy stances and,
Yep.
things like that.
What have they done?
Exactly. What have they actually done?
Yeah.
What does their voting record show, right? Have they been consistent in their views,
Yeah.
on these issues,
Right.
or are they kind of flip-flopping,
Okay.
And there's a lot of websites that you can go to do that research, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
They track, legislative activity so that you can see how people have voted in the past.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And what they've been up to.
Mm-hmm.
It can be very illuminating.
Right. And, to your point, it's about looking beyond the promises.
Exactly.
What have they actually done?
Exactly.
Okay, so that's one thing.
Right.
Now, the other thing is I think it's really important to understand, who is funding these campaigns.
Yeah,
Because it really feels like money plays a huge role.
for sure. For sure.
And so how can we sort of follow the money trail, so to speak?
Yeah, so campaign finance disclosures, right?
Yeah.
So these are actually publicly available, usually through government websites.
Okay.
You can go and look these up,
Mm-hmm.
and that can reveal who the big donors are,
Right?
right, to a particular candidate.
Yeah.
So you can kind of see like, oh, this person who's running for whatever,
Yeah.
mayor or senator or whatever,
Hmm.
they're getting a ton of money from this particular industry. Right. And so then you can ask yourself, well, what are their interests?
Right.
What are they going to be pushing for?
Right.
Do those align with my own priorities for, my community?
Right.
So it's a really important thing to think about.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so we voted,
Yeah.
right? We've looked beyond the slogans and, made our best choice.
Mm-hmm.
But then what?
Yeah.
The election's over. How do we continue to hold these people accountable?
Right.
Because, it's not like our involvement should stop
Absolutely not.
once the, voting is done.
Absolutely not.
So what can we do?
So a couple things. So first of all, you mentioned that voting is like the starting point.
Right.
It's not the ending point.
Right.
Right. So it's like, okay, you voted great.
Yeah.
Now what are you going to do?
Right. Yeah.
So one thing I would say is, think about supporting local investigative journalism.
Okay.
Right. Like those journalists are really, really important. They're the ones who are going to uncover any potential corruption
Yeah.
or incompetence.
Right.
And they need our support.
Absolutely.
And then, you can also think about directly engaging with your representatives.
Okay.
Right.
How do we do that?
Writing letters,
Yeah.
writing emails,
Mm-hmm.
participating in town hall meetings.
Yeah.
Those kinds of things
Right.
that can really, bring attention to the issues that are important to you.
Yeah.
And really, sort of hold their feet to the fire and
Makes
make
sense.
sure that they're doing what they said they were going to do.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's about staying, informed and involved
Exactly.
and making your voice heard even when it's not an election year.
Yes.
And that includes, what we're talking about, what we're sharing, especially online.
Yeah.
So, what are our thoughts about that?
Right. So, in this day and age, we all have a responsibility, I think, when it comes to, public discourse. Right. Like, what are we putting out there?
Right.
What are we sharing? Before you share something, especially on social media, take a second to, verify it.
Right.
Is this actually true?
Right.
Or is this just, some kind of, nonsense that somebody made up?
Yeah.
I think we should really try to encourage thoughtful conversations.
Right.
And like informed discussions rather than just, spreading a bunch of unverified claims,
Well, yeah. Right.
So think before you share.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's such a good point because, I think, we have a responsibility in the information that we're spreading.
We do.
And it's not just about the big national races either, right?
That's right.
Like, I know sometimes it can feel like, the local election.
Yeah.
Like whatever,
Yeah, yeah.
But those are actually really important too.
They are so important.
So, can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So it's crucial to remember that every vote counts. Right. Especially in those state and local elections.
Yeah.
Because those actually, honestly, have a much more direct impact on your day-to-day life.
Right.
Right. So think about, your school board, your local zoning decisions. Like, those are things that are going to affect you, in a very real way.
Yeah.
And also, don't overlook the primaries.
Right.
Right? A lot of people skip those. But those are actually really important because those determine who the final candidates will be.
That's true.
Right.
Yeah.
So your participation at that stage is actually super influential because you get to choose who's even going to be on the ballot in the general election.
Right. So considering all this, the digging beyond the surface, understanding who's funding the campaigns, staying engaged even after the election is over, being responsible with the information that we're sharing, and, understanding that every level of election is important.
Yeah.
Do you feel like we're truly doing enough?
That's the question, right?
Yeah.
Like, are we doing enough?
As citizens.
Yeah. Are we doing enough to really, stay engaged and informed?
Yeah.
I think it's something we should all think about.
Yeah, I think so too.
And I'll leave you with this, just one final thought.
Yeah.
How might actively, seeking out information on who's funding your local representatives or paying closer attention to your local government's decisions, how might that fundamentally shift the way you participate in the political process moving forward?
That's a really great question. I think that's something for all of us to ponder.
For sure.
So that's all the time we have for today. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.
Bye.
Expert speaker.